Hello, folks. Welcome back. I'm sorry for the long break. I had some personal issues to take care of outside of YouTube. Hopefully, I can get them squared away here soon. But in the meantime, I just wanted to put out a video today going over some of the coaching hires that have happened so far, and you know what I think about them and whatnot. We're going to start off with Kenny Dillingham. He got the head coaching job at Arizona State. He was the offensive coordinator for Oregon. And to be honest, if it wasn't for Kenny Dillingham and Bo Nix, this Oregon team wouldn't. They'd probably be going 8-4, 7-5 because that defense for Oregon was not that spectacular. So I think this is a good hire for Arizona State. They're replacing Herm Edwards, which, in case you didn't know, Herm Edwards, he was decent for Arizona State, but he couldn't get him over the hump, and the pressure was building and building and building, especially with all the NCAA recruiting violations that happened during the COVID year, which is a big no-no. If you didn't know, he brought in recruits to come visit Arizona State during the COVID year when everything was shut down. So that was what they were citing him on, and there's still It's still an ongoing investigation right now at Arizona State. So I think this is a good hire. And even Kenny Dillingham has hired a bunch of people on his staff. I'm not going to get into it because if I go through every offensive coordinator, all defensive coordinator, the video would be a lot longer than what I tailed it to be. So we're going to move on to the next coach. Auburn, they hired former Liberty head coach Hugh Freeze. I think Hugh Freeze, I think Hugh Freeze is a great hire from a pure football standpoint, but the issue with Hugh Freeze is that he comes with a lot of baggage off the field, more specifically all the recruiting violations that he committed at Ole Miss and using the official university phone to order prostitutes, which to me is kind of shady. And you can say, well, it's legal now. Now that NIL is around, you can pay players. Yeah, it's true, but the only rule that the NIL has is that the school itself cannot pay players. The boosters funding the stuff can pay for the players, but not the schools itself. That's still illegal. So, and then the whole notion that Hugh Freeze beat Alabama twice, that's a good accomplishment. But if you look at the whole scope of the record, his best season was in 2015, which was he went 10-3. Everything else he's had 4 losses, 5 losses, 6 losses, and then his last year was 7 losses, and that's what caused him to get fired, along with the NCAA violations that he committed at Ole Miss. Now he revitalized his career at Liberty. He brought him into relevance when nobody even knew Liberty even had a football program, much less being relevant in FBS. So he brought him into relevancy as far as college football. We'll get into more Liberty down the list. Now we're going to move on to Cincinnati, and this one blew away a lot of people. Cincinnati has gone with Scott Satterfield, former Louisville head coach. Scott Satterfield is not a bad hire for Cincinnati. We'll get into who they had to replace in a little bit later on, but this is a good hire for Cincinnati and a way to give the football team experience as they're transitioning into the Big 12 into Power 5 play. The downside to it is that Scott Satterfield is his best season was 2019, I believe, um, if I'm right, and he only won 8 games. So he's not a bad hire, but he's also not a home run hit hire. So, anyways, we're gonna move on to Coastal Carolina. Coastal Carolina, Jimmy Chadwell had a lot of buzz going into the offseason about him possibly getting a Power 5 job. So we'll get into Jamie Chadwell a little bit later on, but Coastal Carolina, they ended up going with the NC State offensive coordinator Tim Beck, and Tim Beck is one of the better offensive minds in college football. He's not a home run hit, but at the same time, Coastal Carolina, you're not going to get a Nick Saban or Kirby Smart to come to coach at Coastal Carolina. So, as far as in relation to the coordinator and the program, this is a pretty good hire for Coastal Carolina. Who knows, they might be able to add a couple pieces in the transfer portal, which, if you don't know, the transfer portal is going wild right now. But I'll save that for another video. Now, this is the talk of the town. Colorado hiring Deion Sanders. I did not expect this one. I expected Deion Sanders either stay at Jackson State, or if he was going to move up to FBS, it was going to be either Auburn or USF. But I heard the rumors that Colorado was in talks with Deion Sanders, and I was thinking, well, they could talk to him all they want to. I don't see Deion going to Colorado. And sure enough, the news broke that he went to Colorado, and he's already started cleaning house in Colorado in a big way. Anyways, FAU, they ended up firing their coach, Willie Taggart. Willie Taggart's been going down a dark road, ever since he got fired from Florida State. Which, how he got the job, I don't know, but anyways, they got fired him, and then they ended up hiring Tom Herman. I think this is a great hire for FAU, because Tom Herman, he wasn't a bad coach at Texas. He got fired not because of job performance. He got fired because he couldn't get along with the boosters, and he supposedly it was due to locker room issues, but he mostly couldn't get along with the boosters, which, if you don't know how the boosters work in Texas, the boosters in Texas run everything. So, I think this is a great hire for FAU, and just keep an eye on them. Georgia Tech, they ended up promoting their intern coach, Brent Key, to be the full-time coach. If you don't know, Jeff Collins, he got fired after going, I believe, 1-3 after they lost to Ole Miss, or might have been the game after, I don't know. Anyways, they fired him. Jeff Collins was just a dead man walking on campus. He only won 3 games. That was the most he won during his tenure during a season. 3-9 in 2019, 3-6 in 2020, 3-9 in 2021, and he was at 1-3. So I think Georgia Tech waited too long to fire him, but that's just my personal opinion on the matter. And the whole controversy behind Georgia Tech was that, from what I've heard, is that they interviewed a dozen coaches, but they couldn't come to an agreement as far as, guaranteed money and what Georgia Tech's willing to guarantee versus what the coaches wanted. Because, let's face it, Georgia Tech is not a powerhouse by any measure, and their scheduling does them no favors when they have to play Georgia and Clemson every year. So I understand why these coaches want more guaranteed money, because if the things don't work out, like they may believe it may not. Obviously, you hope for the best, but if things don't work out in Georgia Tech, at least you have some money be to be set aside. Now, this next entry right here, Kent State. The head coach for Kent State didn't get fired because of job performance. In fact, he didn't get fired at all. He ended up getting hired on to the Colorado staff to join Deion Sanders. He was the head coach. Now he's going to be the offensive coordinator for Colorado. So I thought that was interesting. He left because they pursue a better job opportunity in a way, and giving up a head coaching job at a FBS level to be the offensive coordinator at Colorado. So I wish them the best. Now, I did say we was going to get Jamey Chadwell. Here we are. Jamey Chadwell, he was one of the leading candidates for the Georgia Tech job. However, they couldn't come to agreement. That's what I've heard in the rumor mill. I don't know how true that is, but anyways, he ended up taking the job at Liberty that was held by Hugh Freeze. This is a pretty good hire for Liberty. I'm not going to lie to you. Liberty is set to join the Conference USA next year. So I think Jamey Chadwell will keep the momentum up that Hugh Freeze left behind as far as being a relevant program. Louisville the job was held by Scott Satterfield, but Scott Satterfield left for Cincinnati. And one other note about Scott Satterfield, Scott Satterfield's reputation was a bit tarnished, and it left a bad taste. And the Louisville administration, the Louisville high brass, when Scott Satterfield tried to interview for the job at South Carolina in 2020. And to me, that Louisville's been trying to find a way to get out from Scott Satterfield's contract, because you had things swirling around, like, is he going to leave for another job? Or it almost felt like betrayal and backstabbing from Scott Satterfield. So in a way, they're kind of glad to see him go, but at the same time, they're going to wish him the best. But at the same time, they kind of wish he's gone so they can start something new. And sure enough, they did. They brought the hometown kid in. It's going to be Jeff Brom. Jeff Brom, he was the Purdue head coach, but even before then, he was the Louisville quarterback during the mid-2000s under Bobby Petrino. Everybody loved him. And even Jeff Brom was in consideration of the job before it went to Scott Satterfield back in 2018. But Jeff Brom decided to stay at Purdue. He could have took the job at Louisville back then, but he chose not to. So I hope to wish him the best. Now, this next one's a high-profile one. It's Nebraska. They fired Scott Frost, well-deservingly so. He never made a bowl game at his time in Nebraska. I don't even understand how he made it all the way to 2022. He should have been fired last year in 2021. So, anyways, they went with Matt Rhule. Matt Rhule, his last stop was at the head coaching job at Carolina Panthers. It didn't work out for him in the NFL. The most wins he got in the NFL was 5 wins in the NFL. But before he was in the NFL, he was a head coach at Baylor. He turned Baylor around from being a 1-win team in 2017 in the middle of their scandal that broke out under the previous administration to being a fringe, you could say a fringe college playoff contender back then. Of course, they went to the Sugar Bowl after they lost to Oklahoma and then got beat by Georgia. But it was a pretty remarkable turnaround for Matt Rhule during his time at Baylor. So you got to give him props for it. Now, as far as him in Nebraska, I think it's going to be a little bit more tougher to turn Nebraska around than it did for Baylor, largely due to recruiting in the era of NIL. I think Nebraska made a mistake going to the Big Ten. Financially, they didn't, and they're soaking in the money. But as far as recruiting purposes and all that, you can't get these kids convinced to play for you when your main competition's in the Great Lakes area, especially when you're recruiting primarily in Texas. It works for major programs like Ohio State, Michigan, all that. But when you're building a program like Nebraska, and Nebraska was a great program at one point, but they're not anymore. It just makes it harder for Nebraska to build that up. Could they? Absolutely. But, it's just going to be difficult. And they haven't had that success in a long time since Frank Solich. Next one I'm going to get to is Texas State. I'm just going to briefly brush over because I don't know a lot about this coach. His name is G.J. Keene. He was the head coach in Incarnate Ward. So, my apologies for not doing enough research on him. From what I gathered, what research I did get from him is that he led one of the most high-powered offenses in the FCS level in Incarnate Ward. So he'll try to bring that to Texas State. Tulsa, they hired the offensive coordinator from Ohio State, and Kevin Wilson. Kevin Wilson has some head coaching experience coaching at Indiana, but he was let go at Indiana due to some disciplinary issues, and ever since then he's been the offensive coordinator at Ohio State under Ryan Day. So he'll try to bring that high-power offense that Ohio State's had into Tulsa. And Tulsa had Philip Montgomery, which he came from another high-powered offensive tree in Art Briles at Baylor, but it didn't work out at Tulsa. UAB went and took a flyer out on this guy. His name is Trent Dilfer. Reason I remember Trent Dilfer is that Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl ring with doing hardly not a lot for the Ravens, but he still got the Super Bowl ring. So you take it as it is. But he was obviously a former NFL quarterback for the Ravens. He got a Super Bowl ring, and he was a high school football coach. And I think he was an ESPN analyst at one point. I actually know that. I've seen him on being an ESPN analyst before he took a job as a high school football coach. So you take it how it is. UNLV. They hire a former head coach themselves. They hired Barry Odom from Arkansas. He was the Arkansas defensive coordinator, but before then, he was the Missouri head coach. So, this hire, this is probably one of the hires that doesn't make any sense to me. He's got the head coaching experience, don't get me wrong, but his stats as the defensive coordinator at Arkansas were average at best. And then, if you even go back to last year, their run defense was okay, but their pass defenses were just horrible. And it was part of the reason why Arkansas had a regression this year versus last year. Everybody was kind of suspecting Arkansas to possibly be that second or third best team, possibly fourth best team in the SEC West this year, but they just regressed largely due to that passing defense and KJ Jefferson just not putting up the stats like he was last year. So this passing defense pretty much gave Tennessee a run for its money as far as being one of the worst in the SEC. Speaking of Tennessee, their offensive coordinator, Alex Golesh, is heading off to South Florida. he's going to bring that high-powered, up-tempo, bam, 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 bam offense to South Florida. And I mean, I like the move for South Florida, but they're going to have to get the talent to run that offense, because that South Florida team is not what it was, or not what it was even back 5 or 10 years ago. It's not even that desirable. But I'm glad he got the job. We'll see what he can do with the job. Now, the last head coaching hire I'm going to talk about is Luke Fickell. Luke Fickell goes from Cincinnati to Wisconsin. Now, this one, it blew me away at first. I was like, well, why is Luke Fickell going from a guaranteed job that you will have in the Power 5 to another job in the Power 5? It just didn't make sense to me. But the more and more I thought about it, there's certain coaches that fit in certain regions, and some that don't. Luke Fickell is, to me, he's like a Big Ten type of coach. I like Luke Fickell. He brings a sheer toughness to his game plan, but I think Wisconsin did a great job hiring him. So probably my favorite hires, I would have to say, of the list so far. Oh, yeah, let me get some honorable mentions. There is some more openings available, but they haven't announced who's going to be the next head coach. First one's North Texas. They fired. This is the weirdest one for me. So North Texas, they won the Conference USA West. They lost to UTSA, as many people expected them to. They still fired their coach. That one's a weird one to me. They still fired their coach. So they're now looking for a new coach. Purdue, obviously that's vacant right now, ever since Jeff Brom left Purdue to go take the Louisville job. Now that's open. And then Stanford let go of David Shaw. I don't know what he did 3 or 4 years ago, but whatever he did doesn't work. The first like 8-9 years when he was the head coach at Stanford, it worked amazingly. But with this, what he did in the first 8-9 years was this I formation, pounded between the tackles, skip points, play defense. That worked every year, just about. And he would average like 8, 9, 10, sometimes 11 wins a season. But like 3 or 4 years ago, they went to this more spread attack. It just didn't fit the identity of Stanford football. And Stanford is not like any other school, because Stanford, they're like the Ivy League school of the West Coast. They're only going to bring in certain students due to academic restrictions. But whatever they did, it just doesn't work. It didn't work. I don't know if it's just David Shaw saying we need to update with the times, but it ended up costing him his job. So anyways, let me know in the comments down below if you want to hear some of the offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator hires. Like for instance, Luke Fickell already got Phil Longo from North Carolina. So that's why I said, that's another reason why I say that Luke Fickell hire was a home run hit for Wisconsin. Because not only you have a great defensive mind, but you're also going to have Phil Longo that's coming over from North Carolina that's led Drake May to a borderline Heisman season. I know he got snubbed out of the Heisman race, but he was a top 10 Heisman candidate as shown in the polls. Obviously, the top four made it to the Heisman ceremony, which were Stetson Bennett, C.J. Stroud, Caleb Williams, and Max Duggan. So, anyways, just let me know down in the comments below if you want me to dive into some of the assistant head coach or assistant coaches, coordinators, and all that. I'll probably make another video on some of the key transfers or the key players that have entered the transfer portal. I'm not gonna do every player that's entered the transfer portal because it would take me it would take me a week to get through all the players in the transfer portal and all that. So anyways, until next time, I'm out.